Christmas Eve has a way of transforming the ordinary into something magical. The air itself seems to shimmer with possibility, carrying the scent of pine and cinnamon, wood smoke and snow. It's a night when strangers become friends, when hearts open just a little wider, and when the universe conspires to remind us that miracles still happen in the most unexpected ways. Tonight, I want to share a story with you that embodies all of that Christmas magic. It's a tale about kindness meeting circumstance, about two souls from different worlds colliding on the most sacred night of the year, and about discovering that sometimes the greatest gifts we receive are the ones we never knew we needed. So grab your favorite warm beverage, settle into your coziest spot, and let me take you to a small town blanketed in fresh December snow, where one young woman's compassionate heart would change not just her own life, but the life of someone who had everything money could buy, yet nothing that truly mattered. And before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching this from. There's something so beautiful about knowing this story is being shared across different towns, cities, and countries, all of us connected by our love for these heartwarming Christmas tales. The story begins with Emma Walsh, a 26-year-old woman whose life had been a series of quiet struggles and even quieter perseverance. She lived in Snowhaven, a picturesque New England town that looked like it had been lifted straight from a Christmas card, with its Victorian storefronts, gas lamp-style streetlights, and a town square dominated by a massive evergreen that had been decorated with thousands of twinkling lights every December for over 100 years. But for Emma, the beauty of Snowhaven had always existed behind a pane of glass she could look through but never quite touch. She had grown up on the less fortunate side of town, in a small apartment above Murphy's hardware store, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 7 years old. Her grandmother, sweet and loving, but increasingly frail, had done her best on a fixed income, and Emma had learned early that dreams were luxuries reserved for people with different circumstances. After her grandmother passed away 2 years ago, Emma had remained in that same small apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. By day, she served coffee and pastries at the Snowdrop Cafe, a cozy little establishment frequented by the town's working class and a handful of loyal regulars who appreciated Emma's warm smile and genuine interest in their lives. By night, 3 times a week, she cleaned offices in the business district, pushing a vacuum through silent hallways while the rest of the town enjoyed their evenings. Emma never complained. She had inherited her grandmother's quiet dignity, her belief that hard work was its own reward, and her conviction that kindness cost nothing but was worth everything. She wore her dark hair in a simple ponytail most days, owned 3 pairs of jeans that she rotated carefully, and her winter coat, while clean and mended, had seen better days about 5 winters ago. She shopped at thrift stores, counted every dollar, and allowed herself one small indulgence. She bought a gingerbread latte from her own cafe every Friday, using her employee discount, and savored it slowly while reading secondhand paperback romances at the corner table during her break. Her apartment, though small and drafty, was her sanctuary. Emma had painted the walls herself in soft cream tones that made the space feel warmer despite the inadequate heating. She'd found furniture at estate sales and flea markets, pieces with history etched into their scratches and worn edges. A vintage reading chair with faded floral upholstery sat by the window, where she'd spend quiet evenings watching the town below. Her grandmother's quilt, hand-stitched over 3 winters, covered her bed, and photographs in mismatched frames lined the windowsill, capturing moments of a life that had been humble but filled with love. The refrigerator hummed a little too loudly, and the bathroom faucet dripped no matter how tightly she turned it, but these imperfections had become familiar companions. Emma had learned to find beauty in simplicity, to appreciate the luxury of a hot shower after a long shift, the comfort of clean sheets on Sunday mornings, the small miracle of having enough to eat and a safe place to sleep. These were things people like the Thorntons never had to think about, luxuries disguised as basic necessities. The town of Snowhaven, meanwhile, had its own aristocracy, though no one called it that. At the top of the social hierarchy stood the Thornton family, old money that went back 5 generations, built on shipping and railroads, and later, shrewd real estate investments. The Thorntons lived in a sprawling estate on the north side of town, a place most residents had only seen from the road, with its wrought iron gates and long, tree-lined driveway. And the crown jewel of the Thornton family was Alexander Thornton, 32 years old, devastatingly handsome, and according to the local gossip mill, the town's most eligible bachelor. Alexander, or Alex as he insisted people call him, though few actually did, had returned to Snowhaven 2 years ago to take over the family's business empire after his father's retirement. He had a degree from Harvard, an apartment in Boston he rarely used anymore, and a reputation for being brilliant in business but distant in personal matters. The women of Snowhaven, from ages 18 to 80, had theories about Alexander Thornton. Some said he was heartbroken from a failed engagement in Boston. Others claimed he was simply too focused on business to notice the romantic possibilities around him. The boldest among the town's single women had tried various approaches, showing up at his office building with homemade cookies, engineering chance encounters at the country club, even staging a minor fender bender in the grocery store parking lot that had been so obviously intentional that Alex had simply handed over his insurance information and walked away without a word. The truth, though no one in town knew it, was that Alexander Thornton was profoundly lonely. He was surrounded by people all day, every day, employees who deferred to him, business associates who wanted something from him, and social acquaintances who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. His days were filled with meetings and decisions, conference calls and negotiations, and when he returned to his large, beautifully appointed but utterly empty house each evening, the silence was so complete it seemed to echo. The house itself was a masterpiece of architecture and design, with soaring ceilings, custom millwork, and windows that framed the landscape like living paintings. But it felt more like a museum than a home. The kitchen, with its professional-grade appliances and marble countertops, was pristine because Alex rarely cooked, usually grabbing something from the office or eating alone at his desk. The living room, decorated by an expensive interior designer his mother had hired, looked like a magazine spread. But Alex couldn't remember the last time he'd sat on the cream-colored sofa or used the fireplace that dominated one wall. His bedroom was the only space that felt remotely lived in, and even there, the king-sized bed seemed too large for one person, a nightly reminder of his solitary existence. He would lie awake sometimes, listening to the house settle around him, wondering if this was all life had to offer. Success measured in quarterly reports, respect earned through fear or obligation, and relationships built on transactions rather than genuine connection. He had learned to wear his public persona like armor, confident, composed, always in control. But underneath, there was a part of him that yearned for something real, something genuine, a connection that wasn't based on his last name or his bank account. He wanted someone to look at him and see Alex, not Alexander Thornton of the Thornton family fortune, but in a town where everyone knew who he was, that seemed impossible. His position had become both his identity and his prison, and he'd begun to wonder if he'd ever escape it. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that began in the early afternoon and showed no signs of stopping. Emma finished her shift at the Snowdrop Cafe at 6 o'clock, her feet aching from 8 hours of constant movement, but her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. There was something about Christmas Eve, even when you were facing it alone, that made the world feel softer around the edges. She had been invited to spend the evening with her coworker, Sarah, and Sarah's large, boisterous family, but Emma had politely declined. She didn't want to be the charity case at someone else's family gathering, the one they invited out of pity. Instead, she planned a quiet evening in her apartment. She'd make herself a simple dinner, watch It's a Wonderful Life on her small television, and allow herself to feel grateful for what she had, rather than dwelling on what she didn't. She was walking home, cutting through the town square to save a few minutes in the cold, when she saw him. At first, he was just a dark shape slumped on one of the benches near the Christmas tree, and Emma's first thought was that someone had left a pile of clothes there. But as she got closer, she realized it was a man, sitting in a position that looked wrong somehow. Listing to one side, his head dropped forward. Emma's heart rate quickened. In Snowhaven, homeless individuals were rare but not unheard of, and her first instinct was compassion mixed with concern. As she approached, she could see he was wearing expensive-looking clothes, dark wool trousers, leather dress shoes that were completely inappropriate for the snow, and a cashmere overcoat that looked like it cost more than Emma made in 3 months. "Sir?" she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet of the falling snow. "Are you all right?" There was no response. She came closer, noticing now that his face was pale, his breathing shallow, and his lips had taken on a slightly blue tinge. This wasn't someone who had fallen asleep on a bench. This was someone in trouble. Emma's nursing instincts, learned from caring for her grandmother during those final difficult months, kicked in immediately. She assessed the situation with practiced efficiency, noting the signs of hypothermia, the dangerous lethargy, the way his body had begun to shut down. Her hands were already cold from the walk, but she pushed the discomfort aside, focused entirely on the stranger who needed help. The snow was falling heavier now, coating his shoulders and hair with white, nature's beautiful but deadly blanket. She thought about her grandmother's words, spoken so many years ago. "We help because we can, Emma, because someone needs us, and in that moment, nothing else matters." Those words had shaped her, defined her approach to life, and now they guided her actions without hesitation. "Sir, can you hear me?" Emma knelt down in the snow beside the bench, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his shoulder. He was cold, so cold, and when her hand made contact, his eyes fluttered open slightly, unfocused and glazed. She could see fear there, confusion, and something else that broke her heart. Resignation, as if he'd already accepted what was happening to him. "Help," he managed to whisper, the word barely audible, but it carried the weight of desperation. Emma's mind raced. She pulled out her cell phone, an older model she'd bought used, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. As she waited for the operator to answer, she took off her own coat, old and threadbare as it was, and wrapped it around the man's shoulders, trying to provide some additional warmth. The cold hit her immediately, biting through her thin work shirt, but she didn't hesitate. Her coat smelled of coffee and the lavender sachet she kept in her closet, and as she tucked it around him, she hoped it would provide not just warmth, but some small comfort, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment. Emma's mind raced. She pulled out her cell phone, an older model she'd bought used, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. As she waited for the operator to answer, she took off her own coat, old and threadbare as it was, and wrapped it around the man's shoulders, trying to provide some additional warmth. 911, what's your emergency? I'm in the town square, by the Christmas tree. There's a man here, he's barely conscious, he's extremely cold, and I think something's seriously wrong. Please send help immediately. The operator kept her on the line, asking questions, giving instructions. Emma answered as best she could, all the while keeping one hand on the man's shoulder, talking to him, trying to keep him conscious and present. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "Help is coming. Just stay with me, okay? What's your name?" "Alex," he managed, his voice a rasp. "Alex, I'm Emma. You're going to be fine. The ambulance is on its way. Can you tell me what happened?" He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Emma could hear sirens in the distance now, growing closer. She stayed right there beside him, kneeling in the snow, her hand never leaving his shoulder, maintaining that physical connection, letting him know he wasn't alone. When the ambulance arrived, along with a police car, the scene became a flurry of activity. Paramedics swarmed around Alex, asking questions Emma couldn't answer, checking his vitals, loading him onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, turned to Emma. "You probably saved his life," she said simply. "He's hypothermic and dehydrated, and he has an infection that's caused his fever to spike. If he'd been out here much longer..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "Is he going to be okay?" Emma asked, hugging herself against the cold now that her coat was being loaded into the ambulance along with its owner. "We'll take good care of him. You did exactly the right thing." The police officer took Emma's statement, and she explained how she'd found him, what she'd observed. As she spoke, she shivered visibly, and the officer finally noticed she was standing there in just her work uniform of black pants and a thin Snowdrop Cafe polo shirt. "Miss, where's your coat?" "I gave it to him. He needed it more than I did." The officer looked at her with an expression Emma couldn't quite read, something between respect and disbelief. "That was very kind of you. Do you need a ride home? You're going to freeze out here." Emma provided her address, and the officer drove her the 6 blocks to her apartment, making small talk about the weather and Christmas plans. When they arrived, Emma thanked him and hurried inside, her teeth chattering, her hands numb. Inside her small apartment, Emma turned the heat up as high as it would go, which wasn't very high, and wrapped herself in every blanket she owned. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her second-hand sofa, still processing what had just happened. She found herself hoping the man, Alex, would be all right, that the hospital could help him, that he had family who would be there for him. She never imagined, not even for a second, that the man she just saved was Alexander Thornton. The news reached the rest of Snowhaven within hours. In a small town, information travels faster than wildfire, especially when it involves the town's most prominent family. Alexander Thornton had been found collapsed in the town square on Christmas Eve. Alexander Thornton had been rushed to the hospital. Alexander Thornton had been saved by an unknown Good Samaritan. The next morning, Christmas Day, Emma woke in her chilly apartment to discover that she'd apparently slept through most of the excitement. Her phone, which she'd plugged into charge and then essentially forgotten about, showed 3 missed calls from Sarah and a text message that simply said, "OMG, call me." Emma called her back, confused. "Emma, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all night." "I've been sleeping. What's going on?" "What's going on? What's going on? You saved Alexander Thornton's life last night? That's what's going on." Emma's mind went blank. What? "The man you found in the town square. It was Alexander Thornton. It's all anyone's talking about. They're saying he had some kind of infection and a really high fever, and he'd gone for a walk to try to clear his head, but the fever made him disoriented and he collapsed. And if someone hadn't found him, he could have died." Emma sank down onto her sofa, her legs suddenly weak. The man she'd saved, the man she'd given her coat to, the man whose shoulder she'd held while kneeling in the snow, was Alexander Thornton. The Alexander Thornton. "Emma, are you still there?" "I'm here. I had no idea. I didn't recognize him." "How could you? It was dark, he was sick, and you've probably never seen him up close anyway." "But Emma, everyone's trying to figure out who the Good Samaritan was. The police haven't released your name because you're a witness to the incident, but the whole town wants to know who saved him." Emma's stomach churned. "Sarah, I don't want attention for this. I just did what anyone would do." "Are you kidding? Half the women in this town would have stepped right over him if it meant they could somehow benefit from it later. What you did was special, Emma. You didn't know who he was. You just saw someone who needed help." They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, and Emma spent the rest of her Christmas Day in a state of mild shock, trying to process this information. She had saved Alexander Thornton. The thought seemed surreal, impossible, like something from one of her romance novels rather than her actual life. At the hospital, Alexander Thornton was receiving excellent care and a steady stream of visitors. His father arrived first, still commanding and dignified even in his retirement, demanding to know what had happened and why his son had been walking through town alone in the middle of a snowstorm. His mother came next, all concern and fluttering hands, insisting the doctors run every test imaginable. But as Alex lay in his hospital bed, receiving IV antibiotics for the infection that had nearly killed him, his thoughts kept returning to the woman who had found him. He remembered her voice, calm and steady even though he could hear the fear underneath. He remembered the weight of her coat around his shoulders, thin fabric that held the warmth of her body. He remembered her hand on his shoulder, keeping him anchored when everything else was spinning away. He asked the police officer who came to check on him about the woman who had called for help. The officer was professional but vague, citing privacy concerns, but he did say this. "She gave you her own coat, Mr. Thornton, stood there in the snow in nothing but her work clothes, shivering, but she made sure you were warm, said you needed it more than she did." That detail lodged itself in Alex's mind and wouldn't let go. Someone in Snowhaven had helped him without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return, had literally given him the coat off her back. In his entire life, Alex couldn't remember anyone doing something so selflessly kind for him. "I need to find her," he told his assistant, Marcus, who had shown up at the hospital with his laptop and a worried expression. "I need to thank her properly." "The whole town's trying to figure out who she is," Marcus replied. "The police won't say, and apparently she hasn't come forward to claim any kind of reward or recognition." "There's no reward. I just want to thank her." Marcus looked at his boss, this man he'd worked with for 2 years, and saw something he'd never seen before. Genuine emotion. "I'll see what I can find out," he promised. It took Marcus exactly 2 days to identify Emma Walsh. In a town the size of Snowhaven, when you knew the exact time and location of an incident, it wasn't hard to piece together who had been in the area. The officer who had driven Emma home had mentioned it to his wife. His wife had mentioned it to her sister. Her sister worked at the grocery store with Sarah's cousin, and Sarah, despite her promise to Emma to keep quiet, had let the secret slip to her mother, who told her bridge club, and from there, it spread like wildfire. By December 27th, Emma's name was known throughout Snowhaven, and she found herself in the deeply uncomfortable position of being a topic of conversation everywhere she went. At the Snowdrop Cafe, customers she'd served for years suddenly wanted to chat longer, ask more questions, treat her like she'd done something extraordinary instead of simply human. "You're famous," Sarah said with a grin as they worked side by side during the morning rush. "I don't want to be famous," Emma replied, keeping her voice low. "I just want everything to go back to normal." But normal was no longer an option, because that afternoon, as Emma was wiping down tables during a rare slow period, the door of the Snowdrop Cafe opened and Alexander Thornton walked in. Emma recognized him immediately this time. He looked completely different from the man she'd found collapsed on the bench. His color was back, his eyes were clear and sharp, and he moved with the confidence of someone who was used to commanding attention. He wore dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt under a leather jacket, and he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine rather than into a small working-class cafe. The few customers in the shop fell silent, staring. Sarah actually gasped, and Emma, cloth still in hand, felt her heart start to hammer in her chest. Alex's eyes scanned the cafe and landed on her. He crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, and suddenly he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. "Emma Walsh?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "I'm Alex Thornton. I believe I owe you my life." Emma felt her face flush. Every eye in the cafe was on them, and she was acutely aware of how she must look. Her hair in its perpetual ponytail, her work uniform that had seen better days, a smudge of coffee on her sleeve from a spill earlier. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong." His voice was intense, his gaze never leaving her face. "Most people would have kept walking. You stopped, you helped, you gave me your coat. You needed it more than I did. You were standing in a snowstorm without a coat because of me." Emma didn't know what to say to that. She was aware of Sarah hovering nearby, of customers' phones coming out to capture this moment, of her manager peeking out from the back room to see what was causing the commotion. "I'd like to take you to dinner," Alex said, and Emma's eyes widened. "To thank you properly. Please, it would mean a lot to me." Emma's mind raced. Dinner with Alexander Thornton. It was absurd. They lived in completely different worlds. She pictured him taking her to some fancy restaurant where she wouldn't know which fork to use, where the prices on the menu would make her panic, where she'd be completely out of her element. "That's really not necessary," she started to say, but he interrupted gently. "Maybe not necessary, but I'd like to. Please, Emma, let me thank you." There was something in his eyes, something genuine and almost vulnerable that made Emma pause. This wasn't the confident businessman everyone talked about. This was just a person who wanted to express gratitude. "Okay," she heard herself say, "dinner would be nice." The smile that transformed his face was worth the anxiety churning in her stomach. They exchanged phone numbers, and he promised to call her to arrange the details. After he left, the cafe erupted into excited chatter, and Emma found herself the subject of 100 questions she couldn't answer because she didn't know the answers herself. That evening, alone in her apartment, Emma stared at her small closet with something approaching despair. She had exactly one dress that might be appropriate for dinner with a Thornton, a simple black dress she'd found at a thrift store and worn to her grandmother's funeral 2 years ago. She hadn't had occasion to wear it since. When Alex called the next evening, he suggested Café Lumière, the nicest restaurant in Snowhaven, the place where corporate executives took clients and where anniversary celebrations required reservations months in advance. Emma agreed because she didn't know how to politely suggest somewhere less intimidating without revealing exactly how out of her depth she felt. The night of their dinner, Emma spent 2 hours getting ready. She showered, styled her hair down for once, applied the minimal makeup she owned, and put on the black dress. Looking at herself in the mirror, she looked presentable, but hardly the kind of woman who typically kept company with Alexander Thornton. She told herself this was just a thank you dinner, nothing more, that he was being polite and she should simply be gracious and get through the evening. Alex picked her up at 7, driving a sleek car that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. He came to her door, handed her a small wrapped box, and when she opened it, she found a beautiful wool coat, deep burgundy in color, soft as a cloud. "To replace the one you gave me," he said simply. Emma's eyes filled with tears despite her best efforts. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to. Please, let me do this one thing." She put on the coat, and it fit perfectly, and she felt like a different person as they drove through Snowhaven's snowy streets toward the restaurant. Dinner was nothing like she'd feared. Alex had requested a quiet corner table, and once they were seated, away from the curious stares of other diners, he seemed to relax. He asked her about herself, and Emma, who was used to being invisible, found herself talking more than she normally would. She told him about growing up in Snowhaven, about her grandmother, about her jobs at the cafe and cleaning offices. The conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Alex asked thoughtful questions, really listening to her answers rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma talked about her grandmother teaching her to make apple pie from scratch every autumn, Alex's eyes softened with something like longing. When she mentioned how she'd taken 3 buses to visit her grandmother in the hospital every day during those final weeks, missing work shifts she couldn't afford to miss, he reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, a gesture of understanding that needed no words. Emma found herself sharing things she rarely talked about. The guilt she still carried about not being able to afford better care for her grandmother. The dreams she'd had to set aside. The quiet loneliness of building a life alone. And Alex, in turn, began to open up in ways he rarely did with anyone. He spoke carefully at first, testing the waters. But Emma's genuine interest and lack of judgment created a safe space for honesty. "You work 2 jobs?" he asked, and something in his tone made her defensive. "Some of us have to," she said, more sharply than she'd intended. "I didn't mean it as criticism. I meant it as respect. That takes incredible strength and dedication." Emma softened. As the evening progressed, she discovered that Alex wasn't at all what she'd expected. He was funny, self-deprecating, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He talked about feeling trapped sometimes by expectations, about the pressure of the family business, about how lonely it could be at the top. He described boardroom meetings where everyone agreed with him even when he was wrong, social gatherings where people laughed at jokes that weren't funny, relationships that felt more like performances than genuine connections. He spoke about his time in Boston, about the woman he'd almost married who had been planning their wedding before they'd even properly discussed it, who had seen their future together as a series of social obligations and strategic alliances rather than a life built on love and partnership. "Everyone wants something," he said quietly. "A favor, a donation, an introduction, a business deal. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to meet someone who wanted nothing from me at all. Is that why you wanted to have dinner with me?" Emma asked. "Because I don't want anything from you?" "Partly," he admitted, "but also because when I try to remember that night, when everything was foggy and confused and terrifying, the clearest thing I remember is your voice. You stayed with me. You kept me anchored. I just wanted to know who you were." They talked until the restaurant was preparing to close, and when Alex drove Emma home, there was a strange reluctance between them to end the evening. At her door, he took her hand. "Can I see you again? Not as a thank you, just because I'd like to." Emma looked up at him, this man who should have been completely wrong for her, who lived in a different universe, who by all rights should have remained a stranger. But something had shifted during their dinner. Some connection had formed that neither of them had expected. "I'd like that too," she said. And so began what Emma would later think of as the most unexpected chapter of her life. Alex called her the next day, and the day after that. They went for coffee, for walks through the snow-covered streets, for lunch at small, out-of-the-way places where they could talk without interruption. Alex learned that Emma loved old movies and books, that she had a quick wit and a gentle way of seeing the world, that her kindness wasn't just a one-time act, but a fundamental part of who she was. Their dates were a study in contrasts and discoveries. Alex took her to a bookstore on the edge of town, and Emma's face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. She moved through the aisles with reverence, fingers trailing over spines, occasionally pulling out a book to read the first few pages. When Alex told her to pick out anything she wanted, she hesitated so long that he finally just started selecting books himself, creating a stack that she protested was too much, too expensive, too generous. But he insisted, and watching her clutch those books to her chest like treasures made him realize how long it had been since he'd given someone something that truly mattered to them. They went to matinee showings of classic films at the old Paramount Theater, sitting in the balcony seats where Emma would whisper commentary about the cinematography and the costumes, her enthusiasm infectious. Alex found himself seeing these familiar movies through new eyes, appreciating details he'd never noticed before because Emma pointed them out with such genuine delight. Emma learned that underneath the polished exterior, Alex was thoughtful and lonely, burdened by expectations and responsibilities he'd never asked for. He told her about his childhood, about parents who loved him but showed it through pressure and achievement rather than warmth. He described birthday parties where the guest list was carefully curated for social and business reasons, where he'd wanted to invite the boy who sat next to him in math class but was told to invite the son of his father's business partner instead. He talked about summers spent at prestigious camps learning skills that looked good on college applications, rather than simply having fun. He explained how he'd gone to Harvard because it was expected, studied business because it was practical, and returned to Snowhaven because it was his duty, never once asking himself what he actually wanted from life. He talked about his time in Boston, about the woman he'd almost married who had been more interested in the Thornton name than in him. "She used to introduce me at parties," he said one evening as they sat in his car, watching snow fall through the amber glow of streetlights. She'd say, "This is Alexander Thornton," with this emphasis that made it clear the last name was the important part. "I was an accessory to her ambitions, not a partner in building a life." He confessed that coming back to Snowhaven had felt like both a duty and a prison, a return to expectations and traditions that felt suffocating. "Until now," he said one evening as they sat in his car outside her apartment, heat running because it was below freezing outside. "Now it feels like maybe there's a reason I came back." But as their relationship deepened, the complications began to emerge. The town of Snowhaven couldn't stop talking about them. Emma found herself the subject of gossip, speculation, and increasingly judgment. At the cafe, she overheard whispers about gold diggers and social climbers. Women who had never given her a second glance now looked at her with thinly veiled hostility. Sarah, ever supportive, tried to shield her from the worst of it. "They're just jealous," she insisted. "Ignore them." But it was hard to ignore when it was everywhere. Emma's manager at her cleaning job made pointed comments about how nice it must be to have a wealthy boyfriend, implying Emma would probably be quitting soon. Customers at the cafe left smaller tips, as if Emma no longer needed the money. And through it all, Emma felt increasingly like she was living in a spotlight she'd never wanted, playing a role she didn't understand. The weight of constant scrutiny began to affect her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She started second-guessing everything. The way she dressed, the way she spoke, the stories she told. She found herself rehearsing conversations in her head, trying to anticipate questions that might reveal her inadequacies. When Alex's colleagues mentioned vacation destinations, Emma had nothing to contribute because she'd never been on a plane. When his mother's friends discussed their children's educational achievements, Emma felt her lack of degree like a physical weight. She began to shrink in social situations, speaking less, smiling more to hide her discomfort, becoming a quieter, smaller version of herself. At night, she'd lie awake replaying interactions, cataloging every mistake, every moment where her background had shown through like a stain she couldn't wash out. The confidence she'd always had in her own worth, the dignity her grandmother had instilled in her, began to erode under the constant pressure of feeling less than. She loved Alex desperately, but she was starting to lose herself in the process of trying to fit into his world. The Thornton family presented another challenge entirely. Alex's mother invited them to dinner at the family estate, and Emma spent the entire week beforehand in a state of anxiety that made her feel physically ill. She bought a new dress, using money she'd been saving for a new pair of work shoes, and practiced small talk in her mirror like she was preparing for a performance. The dinner was excruciating. Mrs. Thornton was polite but cool, asking questions that felt like tests Emma couldn't possibly pass. Where had Emma gone to college? She hadn't. What did her family do? Her grandmother had been a seamstress. What were Emma's career aspirations? Emma didn't know how to explain that her aspirations involved simply paying her bills, and maybe, someday, having a security net that didn't feel like it could disappear with one missed paycheck. Alex's father was more direct. After dinner, he pulled Alex aside for what was supposed to be a private conversation, but which Emma could hear pieces of from the hallway, where she'd been admiring a painting to avoid the awkward silence in the living room. "She seems like a nice girl, but you need to think about what you're doing. Different backgrounds, not appropriate for someone in your position, what people will say." Emma left that dinner feeling smaller than she had in years. In the car, Alex was furious, apologizing profusely for his parents' behavior. But Emma just felt tired. "They're not wrong," she said quietly. "Don't say that." "Alex, we're from different worlds. You know it. I know it. Everyone in town knows it." "I don't care about different worlds. I care about you." But caring wasn't enough to bridge certain gaps, and Emma was starting to understand that love, if that's what this was becoming, couldn't exist in a vacuum. It existed in the real world, with real consequences and real pressures. Things came to a head in mid-January. Emma was at work at the cafe when a well-dressed woman in her 40s came in, ordered a coffee, and waited until Emma brought it to her table before speaking. "You're Emma Walsh, aren't you? The girl dating Alexander Thornton." "Yes," Emma said carefully. "I'm Victoria Hastings. My daughter Lindsay went to prep school with Alex. They've known each other since they were children." Emma recognized the name. Lindsay Hastings was everything Emma wasn't. Educated at the finest schools, connected to all the right families, comfortable in the world of country clubs and charity galas. She'd been mentioned in several articles about eligible young women in New England society. "I'm not telling you this to be cruel," Victoria continued, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But you should know that people are talking. They're saying you're taking advantage of Alex's gratitude, that you're using his sense of obligation to elevate yourself. The Thornton family has a certain standing in this community, and not everyone thinks you're an appropriate match for him." Emma felt like she'd been slapped. "I never asked for any of this. I didn't even know who he was when I helped him." "I'm sure that's true. But intentional or not, you're now in a position that many people feel you're not suited for. Alex needs someone who understands his world, who can navigate it with him. Someone with the right background, the right education, the right connections. No offense, dear, but serving coffee and cleaning offices doesn't exactly prepare one for life as a Thornton." After Victoria left, Emma went into the cafe's tiny bathroom and cried silently for 10 minutes before washing her face and returning to work. But Victoria's words had hit their mark because they articulated fears Emma had been pushing down for weeks. That night, when Alex called, Emma told him they needed to talk. They met at his car, and as soon as she got in, Alex knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Emma told him about Victoria Hastings, about the gossip, about the constant feeling of being judged and found wanting. "I don't belong in your world, Alex. I'm making you look bad. I'm causing problems with your family. Maybe this was a mistake." "Don't say that." Alex's voice was fierce. "Don't let people like Victoria Hastings tell you who you are or what you deserve. I don't care about any of that." "But I do." Emma's voice broke. "I care that I embarrass you at your parents' house because I don't know which fork to use. I care that people look at us and think I'm a gold digger or that you're slumming it. I care that every single day I feel like I'm failing at being whatever it is I'm supposed to be for you. You're supposed to be you. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted." They argued back and forth, Emma trying to pull away to protect both of them, Alex refusing to let her go. Finally, exhausted, Emma said the things she'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to admit. "I love you. That's why this is so hard. I love you, and I don't want to be the thing that holds you back or makes your life harder. You deserve someone who fits into your world, and that's never going to be me." Alex was quiet for a long moment. "I love you too," he finally said. "And I don't want someone who fits into my world. That world is suffocating me. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like I could actually breathe, like I could be myself instead of Alexander Thornton, heir to the family fortune. You're the first person who ever gave me something expecting nothing in return. Don't you understand? You saved my life twice. Once on Christmas Eve and again every day since then, just by being exactly who you are." Emma looked at him, at this man who had somehow become everything to her in just a few short weeks. And she wanted so badly to believe that love could be enough. But doubt was a persistent voice in her head, fed by every whisper, every judgmental look, every subtle reminder that she didn't belong. They didn't break up that night, but something had shifted. Emma pulled back slightly, putting up small walls to protect herself. Alex felt her retreat and fought against it, trying to prove to her that their relationship could work, that what other people thought didn't matter. He started pushing back against his family more openly. He told his mother that Emma was important to him and that she needed to be treated with respect. He made a point of taking Emma to town events, to the country club, refusing to hide their relationship or treat it as something shameful. When the board members at his company made subtle comments about his personal life, he shut them down firmly. But each of these small battles took its toll on both of them. Emma felt like a cause Alex was fighting for rather than a partner. Alex felt like he was constantly defending their relationship against attacks from all sides. And underneath it all, they were both exhausted. In early February, things reached a crisis point. The Snowhaven annual Winter Gala was approaching, the town's biggest social event of the year. The Thornton family always hosted a table, and attendance from Alex was not just expected, but required. He asked Emma to be his date, and she agreed, though the thought of it filled her with dread. She bought a dress she couldn't afford, spent money on having her hair professionally styled, tried to prepare herself for an evening of feeling out of place among people who had known each other for years, who shared histories and inside jokes, and an ease that Emma could never replicate. The night of the gala, Alex picked her up looking breathtaking in a tuxedo, and when he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made Emma's heart ache. "You're beautiful," he said simply. The gala was held at the historic Snowhaven Hotel, and from the moment they walked in, Emma felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She held onto Alex's arm, smiled when introduced to people whose names she immediately forgot, and tried to look like she belonged in this glittering world of evening gowns and champagne. The ballroom was spectacular, dripping with crystal chandeliers and decorated with elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Ice sculptures stood in corners, slowly melting into art. A string quartet played in one corner, while white-gloved servers circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that Emma couldn't identify. The women were wearing jewelry that caught the light with every movement, and their laughter had a musical quality that Emma couldn't replicate. She felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture, trying to decode social rules she'd never been taught. Which fork for which course? When to sit, when to stand. How to make small talk about charity work she'd never been involved in, vacation homes she'd never visited, private schools she'd never heard of. Every moment required conscious thought, and the effort was exhausting. At their table, Alex's parents were joined by several other prominent Snowhaven families, including Victoria and Lindsay Hastings. Lindsay was stunning, elegant, perfectly at ease in this environment. She greeted Alex with the familiarity of old friendship, touched his arm when she spoke to him, and largely ignored Emma except for a few politely venomous comments. Dinner was a minefield of conversations Emma couldn't fully participate in. Discussions of European vacations and mutual friends, debates about the merits of different boarding schools, stories from charity events and society gatherings Emma had never attended. She tried to contribute when she could, but mostly she felt herself growing smaller and smaller, disappearing into her chair. Alex kept trying to include her, to shift conversations to topics she could engage with. But it only made things worse, highlighting her outsider status more obviously. Emma could see the pity in some people's eyes, the judgment in others, and worst of all, she could see the discomfort in Alex's as he realized how out of place she was. Halfway through the evening, Emma excused herself to go to the restroom. She stood at the sink, staring at her reflection, and barely recognized herself. This wasn't her life. This beautiful dress, this fancy venue, these sophisticated people, none of it was her world, and pretending otherwise was exhausting. When she emerged from the restroom, she found Lindsay waiting in the hallway, examining her manicure with studied casualness. "He'll get tired of you eventually," Lindsay said without preamble. "Alex has a good heart, and he feels obligated to you because you helped him. But gratitude isn't the same as love, and eventually he'll realize that. He needs someone who understands him, who can support him in his work, who knows how to navigate this world. Someone like me." Emma should have walked away, but weeks of pressure and judgment and feeling less than had built up inside her, and something in her snapped. "If you're so perfect for him, why isn't he with you?" The words came out sharper than Emma intended. You've known him your whole life. If he wanted you, he's had plenty of time to figure that out." Lindsay's eyes flashed. He's confused right now, playing at being some kind of rescuer, but Alex will remember who he is, where he comes from, what's expected of him, and you'll go back to serving coffee and cleaning toilets, because that's where you actually belong. Emma felt like she'd been punched in the chest. She walked past Lindsay without another word, found Alex at their table, and leaned down to whisper in his ear, "I need to leave. Please take me home." Alex took one look at her face and stood immediately. "Of course. Are you okay?" "I will be. I just need to get out of here." They made their excuses and left, and the car ride back to Emma's apartment was silent except for the sound of the heater and the muffled city around them. When they arrived, Emma didn't immediately get out. "This isn't working," she said quietly. "What happened? Did someone say something to you?" "It doesn't matter what anyone said. The truth is, I don't fit into your world, Alex. I tried. I really tried. But every time I'm in a room with your friends, your family, your colleagues, I feel like I'm playing dress up. I'm not sophisticated. I didn't go to the right schools. I don't have the right connections. And I'm tired of feeling like I'm failing at being something I can never be. I don't want you to be anything but yourself. But myself isn't enough in your world. Don't you see that? Your parents are right. Victoria Hastings is right. Even Lindsay, as awful as she is right about one thing. You need someone who fits your life, and that's not me." "Then I'll change my life?" Emma looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "You can't, and you shouldn't have to. You have responsibilities, a company to run, a family legacy to uphold. You can't throw all that away just because we fell in love. That's not how real life works." "So what are you saying? That we should give up? That we should just let other people decide what we can and can't have?" "I'm saying that sometimes love isn't enough. I'm saying that I'm exhausted from fighting everyone all the time. I'm saying that maybe everyone else can see something we can't, that we're fundamentally mismatched, and trying to force this to work is only going to hurt both of us in the end." They sat in painful silence for a long moment. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't accept that. I don't believe that where you're from or how much money you have determines whether two people can be together. What we have is real, Emma. What I feel for you is real. I know it's real. That's what makes this so hard." Emma wiped at her tears. "I need some time, Alex. I need to figure out if I'm strong enough for this. If I can handle the constant judgment and the whispers and the feeling like I'm always on trial. And you need to think about what you're willing to sacrifice. Because staying with me means you'll be fighting these battles for as long as we're together. I don't care about fighting battles if it means I get to be with you. You say that now, but what about in a year, 5 years, 10? What happens when you resent me for making your life harder? What happens when you realize all the things you've given up and you blame me for it?" Alex had no answer for that, because somewhere deep down, he worried she might be right. Not about resenting her, but about the toll this would take, the constant struggle against expectations and judgment and family pressure. Emma leaned over and kissed him gently, a kiss that tasted like tears and goodbye. "I love you," she whispered, "but love has to be more than just a feeling. It has to be sustainable. And right now, I don't know if ours is." She got out of the car and walked to her apartment without looking back, because if she looked back, she would lose her courage. Inside, she collapsed onto her sofa and cried harder than she had since her grandmother died, mourning not just the relationship she was losing, but the person she'd briefly thought she could become. For Alex, driving away from Emma's apartment felt like leaving part of himself behind. He went home to his large, empty house and spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their relationship, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong, how they had arrived at this impossible place. The next few weeks were agony for both of them. Emma threw herself into work, taking extra shifts, staying busy so she didn't have time to think about what she'd lost. Alex became a ghost at his own company, going through the motions but unable to focus, unable to care about quarterly reports and business strategies when the only thing that mattered had walked out of his life. They didn't speak, didn't see each other, and the town buzzed with gossip about their apparent breakup. Some people seemed vindicated, saying they'd known it wouldn't last. Others were disappointed, having been rooting for the unlikely romance. And a few, like Sarah, were just sad for two people who clearly loved each other but couldn't figure out how to make it work. It was Alex's mother who finally intervened, though not in the way anyone expected. 3 weeks after the gala, she showed up at the Snowdrop Cafe during Emma's shift. "Mrs. Thornton," Emma said, startled, "can I get you something? I'd like to speak with you, if you have a moment." Emma glanced at her manager, who nodded, and she led Mrs. Thornton to a corner table. They sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither spoke. "My son is miserable," Mrs. Thornton finally said. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Because you're the cause of it." Emma felt her defenses rising. "I never meant to hurt him. I care about Alex very much. That's why I ended things, because I thought it would be better for both of us in the long run." Mrs. Thornton studied her for a long moment. "I came here today prepared to dislike you, to tell you that you were right to break things off, that you weren't suitable for my son, that you'd done everyone a favor by removing yourself from the situation." She paused. "But I've spent the last 3 weeks watching my son be utterly heartbroken, and I've had to ask myself some difficult questions." Emma waited, not sure where this was going. "Alex has had every advantage in life. The best schools, the best opportunities, access to everything money and status could provide. And yet I can't remember the last time I saw him truly happy until he met you. I can't remember the last time he smiled like he meant it, or laughed without it sounding forced, or talked about the future with any kind of genuine excitement." Mrs. Thornton's expression softened, and Emma saw something she'd never expected: vulnerability, regret, and a dawning understanding. "I've been so focused on what I thought he needed, the right background, the right connections, someone who understood our world, that I failed to see what he actually needed. Someone who sees him as a person rather than a position. Someone who gave him her coat in a snowstorm without knowing his last name or his bank balance. Someone who makes him want to be better than what tradition and expectation demand." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something more intimate, more honest. "I've been married to Richard for 36 years. He's a good man, a successful man from exactly the right background. Our marriage was approved by everyone who mattered. And Emma, there have been moments throughout those 3 decades when I've wondered what it would have been like to marry someone I chose with my heart rather than someone who checked all the right boxes. I don't want that regret for my son. I don't want him to wake up 20 years from now in a marriage that looks perfect from the outside but feels empty on the inside." Emma felt tears threatening again. "But it doesn't change the reality of the situation. I don't fit into his world. I don't know how to navigate it. I'm not educated or sophisticated or connected." "No," Mrs. Thornton agreed. "You're not. But you're kind, you're genuine, and you're brave enough to walk away from something you want because you think it's the right thing to do. That takes a strength that most people never develop, regardless of their background or education." She reached across the table and took Emma's hand, a gesture that surprised them both. "I'm not saying this will be easy. There will always be people who judge, who gossip, who think they know better. My husband and I included, I'm ashamed to say. But Emma, if you love my son, and if he loves you, then perhaps the answer isn't for you to leave, but for all of us to do better. For us to open our minds, to challenge our assumptions, to recognize that sometimes the most valuable things in life don't come from the right pedigree or the right schools." Emma couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now," Mrs. Thornton continued, "but I am asking you to consider that maybe you're stronger than you think. Maybe you're exactly what Alex needs, not in spite of your background, but because of it. Because you know what it's like to struggle, to work hard, to appreciate things that people like us take for granted." After Mrs. Thornton left, Emma sat at that corner table for a long time, her mind spinning. Could it really be that simple? Could love actually be enough if the people around them were willing to change, to grow, to accept that different backgrounds didn't mean incompatible lives? She thought about Alex, about the way he looked at her, the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked about her dreams and fears. She thought about how he'd never once made her feel less than, how he'd fought for their relationship even when she'd been ready to give up, how he'd seen value in her that she'd struggled to see in herself. And she realized that by walking away, she'd done exactly what everyone expected her to do. She'd confirmed the narrative that she didn't belong, that she wasn't strong enough, that people like her couldn't have relationships with people like Alex. She'd let fear and insecurity make her decisions instead of love and possibility. Emma pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before finally sending a text. "Can we talk?" Alex's response was almost instant. "Yes." "When?" "Where?" "Tonight. The town square, where we met." "I'll be there." That evening, as the sun set and the Christmas lights that Snowhaven kept up through February began to twinkle on, Emma stood at the exact spot where she'd found Alex that snowy Christmas Eve. She was early, nervous, rehearsing what she wanted to say. When Alex arrived, looking anxious and hopeful in equal measure, Emma's carefully planned speech evaporated. "Your mother came to see me today," she said. "She did? I didn't know. What did she say?" "She said I was making you miserable." Emma smiled slightly. "And then she said some other things that made me realize I've been an idiot." "You're not an idiot." "I am, though. I let fear make my decisions. I let other people's opinions matter more than what I felt in my heart. I convinced myself that love had to be easy or it wasn't real, but maybe the opposite is true. Maybe when you have to fight for something, when you have to be brave enough to claim it despite all the reasons you shouldn't, that's when you know it matters." Alex took a step closer. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try again. I'm saying I'm sorry for walking away. I'm saying that I love you and I'm willing to fight for us if you are." Alex closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms, and Emma felt like she could finally breathe again after weeks of suffocating. "I never stopped fighting," he murmured against her hair. "I've been fighting for you even when you weren't there. I'll keep fighting for you for as long as it takes." They stood there in the town square, holding each other while snow began to fall gently around them, and it felt like coming home. Their second attempt at a relationship was different from the first. This time, they both went in with their eyes open, aware of the challenges but committed to facing them together. Alex was more proactive about setting boundaries with his family and his social circle, making it clear that Emma was a permanent part of his life, and anyone who couldn't accept that would have limited access to him. Emma worked on building her own confidence, on recognizing that she brought value to the relationship not in spite of her background, but because of it. She started taking classes at the community college, not because she felt she needed to prove anything, but because she'd always wanted to learn more and finally felt secure enough to invest in herself. Mrs. Thornton, true to her word, made an effort to welcome Emma into the family. It wasn't perfect. Old habits and attitudes don't change overnight. But there was genuine effort, and that made all the difference. Mr. Thornton took longer to come around, but even he eventually had to admit that his son was happier and more balanced with Emma in his life. The town gossip eventually found new topics. Some people would always judge, would always whisper about the coffee shop girl who landed the Thornton heir, but others began to see them as a couple who genuinely cared for each other, who balanced each other in ways that had nothing to do with social standing. Alex started involving himself more in community projects, using his resources and connections to make real differences in Snowhaven, especially for people like Emma who worked hard but struggled to get ahead. He established a scholarship fund for local students, renovated the community center, and quietly paid off medical debts for families who were drowning in bills. Emma was his partner in all of this, helping him see where the real needs were, keeping him grounded in the realities that people outside his usual circle faced. Emma discovered she had a gift for event planning and community outreach, and with Alex's encouragement and support, she eventually left her 2 jobs to start her own small business, helping local nonprofits with fundraising and awareness campaigns. She brought creativity and genuine understanding of the community, and her business slowly grew. On the first anniversary of the night Emma saved Alex's life, they returned to the town square. The Christmas tree was lit again, snow was falling again, and they stood at that same bench where everything had begun. "A year ago, I thought my life was over," Alex said, taking Emma's hands in his. "I was sick, I was lost, and I was more alone than I'd ever been. And then you came along and saved me in more ways than one." "You saved me too," Emma replied. "You made me believe I deserved more than I'd been settling for. You showed me that love doesn't have to fit into a neat category or follow a prescribed path." Alex reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, and Emma's breath caught. "I know we still have challenges ahead," he said, dropping to one knee in the snow. "I know there will always be people who don't understand us or who think we don't make sense. But Emma Walsh, you are the most remarkable person I've ever met. You're kind and strong and brave, and you make me want to be better every single day. Will you marry me?" Emma pulled him to his feet, tears streaming down her face, and kissed him before whispering against his lips, "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." The engagement caused another wave of gossip in Snowhaven, but this time Emma and Alex faced it together, secure in what they meant to each other. They planned a wedding that reflected both of their worlds, held at the Thornton estate, but catered by the Snowdrop Cafe, with guests ranging from board members and society figures to Emma's co-workers and the regular customers who had been part of her daily life for years. On their wedding day, as Emma walked down the aisle toward Alex, she thought about that snowy Christmas Eve when she'd stopped to help a stranger. She thought about how one act of kindness, one moment of choosing compassion over convenience, had changed everything. She thought about how close she'd come to walking away from all of this, because she'd been afraid she wasn't enough. Looking at Alex, seeing the love and commitment in his eyes, Emma finally understood what her grandmother had tried to teach her years ago, that our worth isn't determined by what we have or where we come from, but by who we choose to be and how we choose to love. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you give someone your coat in a snowstorm without expecting anything in return, you might just find that you've been given something far more valuable. A chance at the kind of love that transforms not just your life, but the lives of everyone it touches. Thank you so much for joining me for this heartwarming Christmas love story. If you enjoyed Emma and Alex's journey from that fateful Christmas Eve to their beautiful ending, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cozy Christmas Loving. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue bringing you these long, immersive romantic narratives that celebrate love, hope, and the magic of the holiday season. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was your favorite moment in Emma and Alex's story? Have you ever had an unexpected encounter that changed your life? And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, may your days be merry and bright, and may your heart always be open to the possibility of love in its most unexpected forms.